بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك وسلم. So last time we talked about nikah, and we ended off sort of in a note about how if we don't feed halal and take care of our families in the way that we should, that they can take us to task on the day of judgment, meaning they can get their revenge on us on the day of judgment. For example, if we feed them haram, or we have a job in which the income is haram, or the food is not right, then on the day of judgment they can show up before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and point fingers at their parents and say that these are the ones who fed us. So today we move kind of from there to the other aspect of being in a marriage, the other aspect of having a family, and that is the good aspect of it, meaning treating them well, not about the fear aspect of it. So one of the greatest adab, the greatest virtues that we have in the deen, is that a person be good to their family. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, that live with your wives in the best of ways. So in the Sharia we see this. Actually, before I move into that, just to give you context about what we've been talking about in this particular class. This class is not about fiqh, right? Well, yeah, we mention it here and there, but it's not about the halal and the haram. But rather, this class is about how you should think, what kind of mentality you should have so that you become the best Muslim possible. So when it comes to your family life, how should you be? We all know we should be good to the family. We all know we should be good to our wives and our children and our husbands. That we know. A lot of us already know the fiqh related to that as well. What is the rights that they have upon us? What responsibilities do we have to fulfill for them? But now the question in this particular class is, what kind of mindset should we have? And so when it comes to our families, and this is not just you as a husband or as a wife, but this is you as a son and a daughter as well. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands that live with them in the best of ways. So your default setting should be that my job is to live with them in a way that is the best possible. And so what that means is that sometimes you take difficulty because of them. Right? Sometimes someone's not having a good day and they take it out on you. They respond to you in a bad way. Right? Whatever issues that they might be having, whatever misconceptions they may have had, whatever might be going through their mind, they may respond to you in a way you didn't like it, right? It hurt your feelings. Or you thought they should have treated you better. We learn from the example of the Prophet ﷺ that he used to tolerate difficulty from his family. And so, for example, there's a very famous narration that's found in Bukhari and other books of ahadith, where Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he came to find out that some of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ would actually speak back to him. He got very upset, and he went right away to his daughter. Who was his daughter? Hafsa radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He went to his daughter and it said, "Do you really talk back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam?" And she said, "Yes, all of the wives do." Now, after having said that, let me clarify. It is not a sunnah to talk back to your husband. Right? That's the wrong message. The message here is that it's human to do that every now and then. So we don't take this as an example of bad conduct from the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. We take this as an example of being human. And so at times, they too, even though they are the greatest of people, and they are the wives to the Prophet ﷺ, even though he is their husband, but he's still a Rasul to them, just like he was to everybody else. But even in that situation, at times, it would overcome them and they would say something back. At times they would separate themselves from the Prophet ﷺ for a short period of time. The point here is that the Prophet ﷺ used to tolerate that. That's the lesson here. The lesson isn't talk back to your wife or talk back to your husband. The lesson is tolerate when it happens because we're all human. Sayyidina Anas radiallahu anhu, he said that the Prophet ﷺ arhamun nas bin nisa was-sibyan, that he was the most merciful of people to women and to children. Again, default setting. This is how he used to be. At the end of his life, meaning his parting words, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned 3 advices. One of those was the very famous as-salah, as-salah, meaning don't forget your salah, don't forget your salah. Advice number 2, وَمَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ, and those people who you have responsibility over, specifically here referring to slaves, because slavery was a thing back then. The Prophet, as his last words, advised the believers, don't give them difficulty beyond what they can handle. And then his last, Allah fin nisa, that fear Allah when it comes to your women. That don't treat them badly, don't be harsh with them. That Allah has placed them in your trust, and so be good to them. The indication being that you will be asked about that on the Day of Judgment. And so the Salaf al-Salihin, they learned this from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they used to practice upon this. On Facebook this past week, I put up a lengthy post about this topic, about the habit of the Salaf, was that whenever they saw difficulty from their family, they used to have introspection at that time. Again, what's the point of this class? It's not about the huquq or the huquq, like the rights of people, but rather it is introspection. It is what we should be like. Rather than demanding stuff from other people, this is my right, you owe me this. That's not what this class is about. That's for fiqh. This class is about making us better people. So from this perspective, when we see difficulty, or we see that our family members are doing something wrong, what's the right approach? The first thing is that you look at yourself. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-mu'minu mir'atul mu'min, that a believer is a mirror to the other believer, meaning a believer is a reflection of another believer. If you see something wrong in a believer, the first instinct should be, what's wrong with me? If you see something wrong in them, do I have that in me? Especially with your family members. That oftentimes, if you don't behave, if you sin against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will be a cause for others to sin around you as well. So the habit of the Salaf al-Salihin used to be that if they saw their family members doing something, the first thing that they would do is that they would look at their actions when it came to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Am I praying the way I'm supposed to pray? Am I staying away from sins? Am I doing the haram? Are my eyes going here and there? That may be the reason why my family members aren't treating me well. That might be the reason why they themselves aren't acting the way that they're supposed to act. So one of the things, if you're raising children, for example, and you see them starting to disobey, the first question you should ask yourself is, how am I disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the experience of the believers has been, of the ulama and the salaha, has been that when you rectify yourself, you will see rectification in those people you're responsible for. So in other words, the wording that he uses, he says, فَلَمَّا خَالَفَ رَبَّهُ كَذَلِكَ خَالَفْتُ زَوْجَتُهُ. In the same way that he disobeys or he goes against his Rabb, his spouse goes against him. The two are linked together. Maulana Jalaluddin al-Rumi, the great, he's known for his poetry, but he was a Hanafi qadi, so he was an alim. He said that day and night you fight to rectify the characteristics of your spouse by trying to remove the faults in her through you. So day and night you're arguing with your spouse and you're trying to change him or her by using yourself as the means to change them. That you're removing what they are doing wrong and you're going to be the fix for that. You're going to be the solution for that. But he said that instead, had you purified yourself by means of them, that rather what they are doing, that you notice that and you use that as a means to fix yourself, that it would be better, and by doing this you would fix yourself and you would fix him or her as well. This is difficult, because oftentimes when we see people around us doing something wrong, we get mad. And especially if it's something aimed at us, we get even more mad. And so the way of the believer, if he really wants to rectify himself, is not to get mad at others, but to get mad at yourself first. That how am I going to tell this person, correct yourself, correct this, while I myself am disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We spoke about this, I don't think we spoke about it this year, but we've spoken about it before in the past, that this doesn't mean you don't fix people. There's a place for that as well. But right now our goal is about fixing ourselves. There is a place to do al-amr bil ma'ruf, to command the good and to forbid the evil. That should be done. But the focus today, or the focus of this class, is fixing yourself, so we'll stay on that topic. So he concludes by saying that, oh my brother, that if you want your spouse to be continuously good with you, then be continuously good with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he goes on to say that tolerating the difficulties that you get from your family is not the end all. Meaning that's not it. But rather is to be better than that. Is to go beyond that. Not only tolerate the difficulties, but give ease to the people around you. Not only tolerating the difficulties from your spouse and from your children and from your parents, but instead of that, go beyond that and give them ease. So for example, with your spouse, you joke around, you play around. With your children, the same thing. With your parents, you bring them ease whenever you can. Don't just stand there and take the difficulties and think that you've done enough. But it should be above that and beyond. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, أَكْمَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِيمَانًا, that the believer who is most perfect when it comes to his iman, أَحْسَنُهُمْ خُلَقًا, is the one who is best in his character, وَأَلْطَفُهُمْ بِأَهْلِهِ, and the one who is most merciful, the most nice to his family. So your iman, the sign of the completion of your iman is two things. One is that your character itself becomes best, and number two, that you become nicer and more merciful towards those people who are around you, specifically your family. خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِنِسَائِهِ وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِنِسَائِي. Again, the Prophet ﷺ said that the best of you are those who are best to their women, and I am the best to my women. And so obviously for the men that's obvious. For the women it goes the other way, that the best of women are going to be those who are best to their husbands. So this is something that we carry in balance in this deen, is that oftentimes people read the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ is encouraging the women to be good to their husbands, and that's a fact, no question. But the opposite is also found as well from the Prophet ﷺ, that a man, his role is to be strong when the time is to be strong, but his default setting is one of mercy. You need to be able to carry both. You can't be a coward and be nice to everybody, and you can't be brave and be mean to everybody. So the default setting of the Prophet ﷺ was one of mercy, but when it came time to be tough, when it came time to stand up, he was able to do that. How do you do that? People have certain natures, right? Some people by nature are very soft. Some people by nature are very harsh. Some people by nature are very kind, and some people by nature get angry very easily. That's your nature. How do you change that? Right? Sometimes we see people that they're very soft, they're very merciful, but when any difficulty comes, they're the first to break down and they're the first to run away. And then you find that, that alpha male who's like tough and big, but when it comes time to be nice, he has no idea how to do that. A believer should have control over their actions and not be a slave to their desire, or not be a slave to their base instinct. So if your base instinct is to be rough, tough, and get angry quickly, then you need to be stronger than that and control it when it's unnecessary, when it's not needed. And when it's needed, let it go, let it out. If your base instinct is to be kind and soft, then that's fine. But when it comes time to stand up, then you need to be able to do that as well. So you need to be in control of your instincts. Your instincts can't be in control of you. So the same thing comes to being that feminine role for women and being that masculine role for men. That you don't just go by what your instinct is, although that your instinct may be appropriate in most situations, but in a proper situation you need to be able to change that. Any questions? Any questions from sisters? Yeah.
So I guess back to that point about, I guess, if you are someone that's tough by nature, then you should try to, I guess, control that when you need to be, but let it go when you do, and vice versa. How do you, I guess, like, prevent it from being too much? So if you are someone that's rough by nature, how do you not prevent it too much so that now you become soft? And then if you're easy going, how do you, I guess, not try to be too mean? I guess, how do you find that balance?
So it's not so much about balance as it is about control. So you need to be, you have to understand your own nature first. Oftentimes people who are quick to anger don't even realize that they're quick to anger. So one is you have to know your own nature first, and then once you know your nature, then you have to be able to dominate yourself, meaning control yourself. And likewise, that's something that comes by training. So you find yourself in a particular situation where you can. Let me give you an example. People who are quick to anger, they might find themselves in a situation where it angers them, and it may even be right for them to become angry. They see something being done that is against the deen, for example, and so they get angry. And in that particular situation, it may actually be the situation in which one should get angry for the sake of Allah. But in those particular situations, you will control yourself and not show that. This is oftentimes best done under the guidance of a scholar or somebody who knows these things, so that they can tell you, for now, I don't want you to get angry at anything, even if it's right. And then for the opposite as well, that for a person who's by nature very subtle, very soft, then for that particular situation, we may ask that person to find the situation where they're going to be a little aggressive. But it's about control, and it's about sort of guiding yourself in that situation. It's best done by somebody else to tell you, because it's very difficult for an individual to assess themselves properly. Oftentimes we'll get quick to anger, we'll anger, and then afterwards we'll justify it, even though it may not have been the proper thing. And we need someone to point that out to you, that no, you thought you were doing the right thing, or you justified it, but it was not the right thing. Any questions from sisters? There's a point I wanted to make before we move on about this concept of ghayrah. Whenever we speak about men and women, the idea of ghayrah comes up. Ghayrah is a type of jealousy. Ghayrah is a jealousy that you feel, and usually when the word is being used in a situation where jealousy is not only justifiable, but it's recommended. It can go both ways. So for example, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that one type of ghayrah is a ghayrah that angers, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes anger. No, let's say it this way. One type of ghayrah is one that displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the ghayrah of a man to his family in a doubtful situation. So for example, ghayrah is jealousy. For a man to get jealous of his wife, for example, or wife of a man to get jealous, or it's to get jealous over their family, their children, because they think they're doing something, that this type of jealousy, where it's just based on doubt, is something that Allah is displeased with. Why? Because it's based on what's called su'ul dhann. It's just you're thinking badly of the person. So for example, your spouse goes out for a legitimate need, right? So the man, for example, he's going to the masjid. He goes to the masjid and comes back, and the wife's like, "Who'd you talk to?" Right? I know those women who come to the masjid. Did you talk to them in the foyer? Like, there's no reason to have that doubt. You don't have that doubt, and because now you're thinking badly of that person. But on the flip side, there is also the ghayrah that has its rightful place, and this is one that is praiseworthy. So one time the Prophet ﷺ, he said to his daughter Fatima radiallahu anha, he said, "Ayyu shay'in khayrun al-mar'a." He said, what is the best thing for a woman to have? The Prophet ﷺ, right, he's asking his daughter, what is the best thing for a woman to have? And she said that it is that she does not look at any man and no man looks at her. She does not look at any man and no man looks at her. The Prophet ﷺ hugged her and he recited the ayah ذُرِّيَّةً بَعْضُهَا مِنْ بَعْضٍ, that progeny or children that are, part of them is from so what he's trying to say is that progeny that come from them, meaning he's showing that what she said is what he would have said, that she is, in other words, like, you are really my daughter kind of thing. Now what does this mean? This is the type of ghayrah where unnecessarily a man doesn't look at a woman and a woman doesn't look at a man. So what we do with this ghayrah is we balance the two, right? Our country, this culture here, has gone way too far off to the side, where men and women look at each other, do everything together, sit with together, and if the husband were to say anything, they would yell at him for being jealous. Whereas he has a right to be. And the same thing for a woman. That if your husband is out meeting and sitting and going out and drinking and eating and doing all this stuff, and looking at women and women are looking at him and talking unnecessarily, then that type of situation is not a good situation, and jealousy in that situation, to prevent it, is actually something beneficial and something praiseworthy in our sharia. So this concept of ghayrah is this idea that you feel jealous for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that jealousy is bounded. It's not too far off to one side where you're becoming jealous for no good reason. Meaning, I shouldn't even say no good reason. You're becoming jealous because you think badly of the person. That's a better way of saying it. And this is balanced on the other side, where you should become jealous if things are being done unnecessarily. Any questions about that? From sisters? So in the next section, he moves on to the workplace. And you guys, you're obviously students right now. Some of you guys might have jobs, but eventually most of you will have jobs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَانْتَشِرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَابْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ. Spread throughout the earth and seek the fadl of Allah. Seek the provisions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here's a command, that while you're in this dunya, go out. Seek your rizq. Seek your provision. Seek your food. Seek your wealth. Allah is commanding it. وَابْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ. This is from the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Go and seek it. But when you seek it, seek that which is halal. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that whoever seeks the dunya looking for that which is halal and avoiding having to beg, working for his family, and assisting his neighbor, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will meet him on the day of judgment shining like the full moon. So it's an expression, meaning Allah will meet him in a way that he is very pleased. Man talaba dunya halalan. Whoever seeks the dunya, seeking that which is halal. And at the same time, there's many ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in which he showed his dislike for begging. That whoever opens the door for begging, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up 70 other doors of poverty for that person. If a person is in really difficult need, then he can do it. At that point it's acceptable. But if he's going around asking for money when that strong need is not there, then that becomes a means for further poverty, not for removing that poverty. So one of the greatest obligations, especially for men as breadwinners, is that you seek halal income. So as an employee, an employer, somebody in the workplace, what is your intention? Again, what is the way that we should be thinking? When you go into the workplace, then your intention should be, one, that I am seeking, number one, a halal income. Number two, I am trying to avoid having to ask people for things. And I'm going to avoid coveting or wanting what other people have. I'm going to be happy, content with the halal that Allah has given me. If Allah has given you the bare minimum and it's halal, be content with it. Don't go looking for more than that, especially if it throws you into the haram or into the doubtful even. Intend with your income, intend with your job to help people, to help the deen especially, to help your family, to make sure that they are free of any needs. And the one who does this will be like the mujahid, the one who strives in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because it is. When you go out into the workplace, there's a lot of ways that you can lie, that you can cheat, you can take things that aren't due to you, you can pad your income with different ways that are doubtful or outright haram. And it becomes very easy to do. In addition to that, when you go out and you trade, the way of the Salaf and the way of the scholars, the Sulaha, was that they would give advice, nasiha, to other Muslims. In our situation, non-Muslims. We would encourage them to do what's good, turn them away from what's bad. A person should desire for himself he should desire for others for what he wants for himself. So when you go and trade and you're buying and selling with someone, you're not going to rip that person off because you wouldn't want it for yourself. So you're going to deal with them fairly. Even if you can rip them off. You say, no, this is too much. Take less, take this. And that he intend to be just and excellent in all of his dealings with people. That he intend to command the good and forbid the evil, which I mentioned already. But this too, that when he goes around, because when you're out in the workplace, or out in the mall, out in the shops, which all of us do, that you see things taking place. Some are good, some are bad. So when you see the good, encourage it. When you see the bad, whatever you can do to discourage it, do that. And so Imam Ghazālī mentions that if a person fulfills all of these things that I just mentioned, that even if he made no profit, he will be successful in the akhirah. And then whatever profit he makes is just extra in this dunya. Alright, let me go through that list one more time. So for the one who buys and sells, for the tajir, and for us, it's if you're working a job or if you're going shopping, that when he starts that endeavor, that he does it with the intention of not having to beg or ask others for anything, not having to covet from people what they have, sufficing and being happy with the halal, seeking to help the deen and help other people, to suffice for their family, so they too are taken care of. That person will be like a mujahid, and that he intend to do nasiha, to give good advice, to deal well with other people, especially the believers, that he want for people what he wants for himself, and that he intend justice and excellence in all of his matters, to command the good and to forbid the evil. And if he does all of these things, then this person, he has gained his akhirah, and whatever profit he makes on top of that, that's just extra in the dunya. So even if he broke even, he would be perfectly fine because he would have been successful in the hereafter. Any questions about that? Go ahead.
What if like a company gave like a holiday bonus? How should we take that, or is that okay to take?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question is about if you work for a company and they give you like a Christmas bonus. I think nowadays everybody just calls it a holiday bonus, but yeah, even if they were to call it a Christmas bonus. So in that situation, it's still okay to take. And the reason being is that from their perspective, it's a gift. And like anyone giving you a gift, if they give you a gift, you can take it. It doesn't really matter why it's being given to you. If you work for like a Jewish company and they say, oh, it's Hanukkah, we're giving every employee some money, that's okay to take. What you need to be careful about is taking money that is not owed to you. So for example, you're supposed to work 9 to 5, and the expectation of your job is that you do not check out, you do not clock out till 5, and you leave at 4:45. That's 15 minutes you didn't earn. right? You're a 9 to 5 worker, and your expectation is that you be there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you show up at 9:15. That's 15 minutes you didn't earn. So be careful of these things. You have some machine at work, or a car that they lend you, or a computer, and they tell you it's only for this particular use. Then it's only for that particular use. Anything that you use beyond what you're permitted to do, then that is like stealing from the company. So you have to be very careful of that. And if you paid attention, my wording is very particular. Meaning sometimes your job doesn't care if you leave at 4:45. They may not care that you show up at 9:15. If they're okay with it, then it's okay. You can do that. So, but if they're very particular, no, we pay you to be here at 9. The expectation is for you to be here at 9. Then 9:15, that's 15 minutes that you're not allowed. That money is not for you. Go ahead.
So would that consider to be haram money?
It would be, right. Unless the job allows it.
So the money you would earn from that 15 minutes, just that would be considered haram income? Or like all of it?
No,
Like,
just that.
Just that.
Right, yeah. So just the money that you took that was not owed to you, that money is not yours. Now, I've been in a situation where my job had given me some money that I didn't feel like I earned it. So I went to them and I said, I got this check. I didn't do anything for it. Or what it was being given for, I didn't do that. And the chief financial officer was like, that's okay. You can have it. So in that situation, I have their permission now. So it's like a gift. It's like they gave it to me, it's okay. But in those situations where the job expectation is one thing and you're doing something else, then that's not permissible for you to take. I think even in the group, we've had a couple questions about certain job opportunities. So let me just reiterate the principle. It's always good to ask a scholar anyway. But whenever we look at a job, there's two things that we need to take into consideration. One is, where is your pay coming from? And number two, what is the job that you're doing? Those two have to be looked at. So number one, where is your pay coming from? If you work, for example, for like an alcohol company, right? An alcohol store. And your job there is to mop the floor. The job is halal, right? There's nothing haram about mopping the floor. But the income that they're paying you with, if the majority of that income is coming from sales of alcohol, was haram money. So you can't accept that money. And vice versa. If you work for a company where the majority of their things are halal, so for example, say you work at a 7-Eleven, the majority of what they sell is halal. But your job is to man the hot dog machine, right? So then everyone who comes and buys a hot dog, you're the one who's serving it to them. That particular action is impermissible. Or for example, you're in the alcohol section of Wegmans. Like that's your counter. So majority of things Wegmans sells is halal. So your pay is halal. But the job you're doing is impermissible. So you have to look at both of those and carry that. And then there'll oftentimes be sort of gray areas in your job description. For that, you can speak to an alim, speak to a scholar, run it by them, and then they can tell you what the ruling would be. But as a general rule for yourself, whenever you look into a company, you ask yourself, where is the money coming from? And what is the job that I'll be doing? And if both of those are okay, you're probably okay. If one of the two is not, then you should ask somebody about it, unless it's obviously clear. Any questions? Now, coming to your job, while you're on the job, right? Assuming everything is okay. What is the mentality that you should bring to that job? Where should your mind be during that job? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, لا تلهيهم تجارة ولا بيع عن ذكر الله. That their trade and buying and selling does not divert their attention from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How are you supposed to be on the job? On the job, as much as you can, you should still be in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because being in Allah's remembrance, one, it brings barakah to the work that you're doing. Two, that work becomes a means of becoming closer to Allah. Right? Imagine you leave the house for your work in the morning, you spend 8-10 hours remembering Allah. By the time you finish your job, not only have you earned money, but you've also become closer to Allah and all of that adhkar that you had done during that time. And whatever work you're doing will have greater barakah in it as well, Because the remembrance of Allah is there too. So the way of the believers is that neither trade nor buying and selling deviates them or removes them from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It only brings them closer to it. The Prophet ﷺ said that whoever enters a marketplace and he says, La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu yuhyi wa yumit wa huwa hayyun la yamutu biyadihi al-khayr wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. That this person, and we mentioned this hadith in the past, that a person who enters a market and recites this, a million rewards given and a million sins removed. A million of the minor sins removed from him. And a house in Jannah. It's very simple. But here again, what's the inner thing that's taking place here? Is that when you enter the market, you remind yourself of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. There is no ilah, there is no God besides Allah, who is alone, He has no partners. Lahul mulk wa lahul hamd. He owns everything, all praises are to Him. So think of the words, right? You're entering into the marketplace and you're reminding yourself that there is no ilah other than Allah. It's a reminder now, whatever you plan on doing in this business, whatever you plan on doing in the mall, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala owns everything. Everything praises Him. Yuhyi wa yumit. He gives life and He gives death. He has control over everything. Wa huwa hayyun la yamutu. And He is all living, ever living. He doesn't die. Biyadihi al-khayr. All goodness is in His hands. Any barakah, any khayr you want from your buying and your selling and your working, it belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, meaning only from Him can you get it. Wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. And whenever you think about doing something haram, whenever you think about disobeying Allah in that marketplace, from the things of like your eyes looking at something that or someone that they shouldn't be looking at, to buying and selling in the haram, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has power over everything. In other words, stick to the halal, do what is right. Outwardly it may seem like you're losing profit or you're losing business, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make it otherwise. A million rewards, a million sins, and a house in Jannah. And then he finishes off this chapter from a statement from one of the awliya. He said that a man does not reach the stage of loving Allah and His Messenger except that he treats all of creation kindly. Except that he treats all of creation kindly from that which he has of wealth and property, and specifically for the believers. Any questions?
What's the view on women working with like non-mahram men?
Yeah, so what about women working with non-mahram men? Well, it's the same as men working with non-mahram women. So, just to keep it in perspective, the workplace can be very difficult, and especially challenging in our situation here in the United States. And I'll tell you from my own experience, because I work with nurses and technicians, and there's usually in the hospital there's more women than men. It can be very difficult. So you have to always keep in mind who you are. When you go into that sort of environment, it's very easy to forget who you are. Meaning, when everyone in the workplace laughs and jokes and mixes and becomes a big family, right? People laugh and say, "Oh, this is my work wife. This is my work husband," and somehow that becomes okay to joke with them even more so. Like, people do this, and it's no surprise that illicit relationships, meaning zina, in the workplace is common. It takes place, and it's the number one place for zina to take place in this country, probably in every country. because people aren't careful. And let the non-Muslims worry about themselves, but as far as Muslims, we have to be very careful about that. So the mindset that you take, if you take the mindset of the remembrance of Allah into your workplace, where throughout the day you're reciting istighfar and you're remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that will go a very long way. Because it's very difficult to say things and look at things that are haram while you're saying astaghfirullah, 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 to remind yourself of that. So to have the proper mindset that even though I'm in a workplace and everyone else is acting a certain way, that I'm not them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects something from me and I need to answer for that. And then getting into this habit that every time you look at something that's impermissible, that you say istighfar. So if your eyes happen to land on something that's not permissible for you to look at, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. And then when you speak with people, the same thing, that you speak with people, obviously, the opposite gender, that when you speak with the opposite gender, that you have a particular point in mind, that there is a particular reason that I'm going to speak to this person, do that, and then move on. And I'll say it again, just in my experience, the thing you have to be most careful about is becoming like everybody else. It's very easy to do, especially when you work in places where there's other Muslims, because you see other Muslims doing everything. And so it becomes very easy to become like the other Muslims. What they do, let them answer for it, let them worry about it, but we ourselves have to protect ourselves. So now, whether you're a woman in a workplace or a man in a workplace, if you're working with those who are non-mahram, which will be pretty much everybody, very rare for you to be working with your own family, then in those situations, just keep those mental barriers. Don't let them go. That the ideal place for a Muslim is one that is conducive for their iman. An ideal place for a Muslim is, for example, like the masjid, where most masajid, actually maybe not even anymore, the masjid should be an environment where you walk into it and the men go one way and the women go a different way. So the masjid should be a place that while you're there, it protects you from looking at that which is impermissible, it protects you from doing what is impermissible. All Muslim spaces should be like this. This is the reason why we sit like this, right? There's a reason that this wall is here in this room, is that we want this place to be some place where you can come, you can sit, and at least for this particular hour, it's protecting your eyes, it's protecting you from doing something that would otherwise be displeasing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because we can control it. We have the ability to ask for a wall, and so we do it. But now, as soon as you walk out of here, you're going to walk into an environment that's not that anymore. We don't have control over that environment. So in that environment, then we understand that it's an environment that's not conducive to our iman. It's not protective to our iman. It's never meant to be that way. So in those situations, we now have to take steps ourselves to protect ourselves. Keep your eyes lowered. Speak when you need to. Continue in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on. So I've found it most helpful that whenever we think about these situations, that we compartmentalize the idea of Muslim spaces. So whenever Muslims gather, that they have an environment that protects their iman, and then non-Muslim spaces where we don't have control. And by Muslim and non-Muslim, I mean where we have control and where we don't have control. So we can have Muslim spaces in non-Muslim lands. So where you have control, that's your space. You make it conducive, you make it work for you. In those places where you don't have control, then in those places you have to bring your own barriers. What is the mental barrier you're going to bring with you? Is 1, keeping your eyes lowered. And then 2, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constantly as a way of protecting yourself. And then 3, doing istighfar whenever you happen to hear or look at something that is impermissible. Also, we mentioned this before, the idea of ghībah, backbiting, lying, very common in workplaces. Right? People talk about each other all the time. Right? Nurses constantly backbiting each other. It's just normal. And that's something that we can't fall into. Right? So we try to avoid that as much as we can. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So when you talk about the creation's kindness, does that include
So the question is that if you're, as a default, we're going to treat creation as kindly as possible. And so the question is about those who are mean to you, who are not kind to you. So there's two approaches to this. The first approach is what we're trying to do in this class, is that this class is about making ourselves better people. And so one of the tools of making yourself a better person is to tolerate those people who are not good to you. Because in that toleration, so forget about whether or not that person is wrong in what they're doing. They may be absolutely wrong, they may be mistreating you, they may be hurting you. Just setting that aside for right now. For fixing ourselves and making us better people, one of the ways of training yourself to have patience is to tolerate another person's harm. One of the ways of removing any kind of arrogance from yourself is that when someone treats you badly, you treat them well. And so these are tools that we use to make ourselves into better people, to purify ourselves, to purify our heart, to make us those who are more beloved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one perspective is that, and so it's important. So for example, the Salaf would say that you should always have someone who you keep to give you good advice. Ideally, that's like a sheikh, or that's somebody that you trust who's older and wiser and more knowledgeable. But if you don't have that person, then find a really good friend. A friend who's really good, who will tell you and give you good advice. They will tell you when you're doing something wrong. And if you don't have that person, then ask your enemy about yourself. Because that enemy will be honest in pointing out all of your faults. And so even though they're an enemy, they can be utilized for benefit. All right, so that's one aspect. One aspect is about islah al-nafs, about making ourselves better people. Now the other aspect is about being around people who, quote unquote, they're toxic. So if you find that this person is worsening your iman and you're not able to benefit from that person, then it's better to disengage from that person. Some of those people may be those who have rights over us. So for example, our parents or brothers and sisters, family members who actually have a right. In those situations, you can't disengage from your father or your mother. In those situations, you do what you need to do to fulfill their responsibilities and their rights. And then other than that, protect your iman. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anyone else on the sister side?
When you talk about the workplace, you said there's no difference. You said that there was no difference between a man working amongst non-Mahrams and a woman, but I'm assuming that we know that it's necessary for men to go and provide for their family, right? So in which cases, or is it ever as husbands in the future, or fathers or brothers, how do we decide whether it's worth it for someone that we know, a female that's close to us, to let them work in a place like that? Is there any situation where that's okay? Or
Yeah, so these are two different questions, right? So let me just clarify that when I say a woman in the workplace and a man in the workplace dealing with non-mahram women, that's not addressing the issue of whether they should be there in the first place, right? That's an issue of they're already there. How do they work with one another? Then they work very carefully with one another, meaning keeping their iman at the forefront of their concern. Now, as far as men working and women working, obviously, from an Islamic perspective, we know that each one has their responsibilities, right? The responsibility of a man is to provide for his family and to provide for his wife. That is his responsibility. If he fails in it, Allah will take him to task on the Day of Judgment. A woman's responsibility is not to take care of her husband. She can, if she has the means to do that, but that is not her responsibility. She can be very wealthy, and he still has to support her regardless. So for that reason, we look at people's responsibilities. A man's responsibility is that he has to work, and if he needs to leave the house to do that, then he has to leave the house to do that. And so he will find himself in that precarious situation and difficult situation of being exposed to that which might be toxic to his iman or haram for him, and so he has to take very care to do that and balance that with the idea of fulfilling his responsibility while protecting his iman at the same time. Now, if a man doesn't need to put himself in a bad situation, then he won't do that, right? You're not going to put your iman at risk for no good reason. You'll only do that when there's some benefit that outweighs that risk. So for men, if you have a job, if you need a job, you need to go and work, and you're going to work despite the risk up to your iman while taking precaution for it. Now, if we look at women in the same way, if a woman does not have the need to work, then why would she risk her iman without a clear need or benefit for it? It just doesn't make any sense. So if a woman can work in a sense that she's going to be a school teacher, where there are no non-mahram men around, and all assuming her main responsibility, which is taking care of her home, is taken care of, and she wants to go and do this extra khidmah for the deen, for the community, then she can do that. But if that environment that she wants to work in is going to be one that's going to be harmful for her iman, while there is no clear benefit or necessary need, then the cons outweigh the benefits, and it doesn't make sense to do that. So, you guys probably have noticed that I don't like giving specific answers to people. What I like to do is give you guys principles, and then from those principles you can work with that, and you can take that, because I can't give you an answer for every single situation that you will find yourself in your life. But what I can do is give you principles by which you can judge what's taking place in your life. And then when you come across those particular scenarios where you don't know, then you can ask. And there's ulama around to ask those questions to. So the general principle that you will take is that when you go out anywhere, that you ask yourself, what is the benefit that I'm hoping to achieve, and what is the harm that I might run into? So for men, just reiterating myself, for men the benefit is not just a benefit, but it's a necessity that you need to provide for your family. And there's a harm there, if the benefit supersedes the harm, then you will tolerate that. That being said, if you have two jobs that you can look at, right? One job in which there is no harm, and another job where there is harm, then obviously you'd be a fool to go into the place where there's a threat to your iman for no good reason, when you can take another job where you're safe. And so for women it's the same thing, that if you don't have a need to earn an income, it's taken care of by somebody else, then it doesn't make any sense to put yourself into a workplace that might potentially harm your iman by putting you into situations in which you may disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It just doesn't make any sense. Any questions further? Alright, inshallah. So we'll stop here. My plan, I'm actually in like a couple hours, I'm heading out to JFK, so I'll be leaving for about 10 days or so. So next Wednesday, I won't be here. I'll be in Medina Munawwara, inshallah. So once I get there, I'll see if I can Zoom class. So if I can, 5 p.m. Wednesday, inshallah, we'll just Zoom a class. But I'll let you guys know in the Telegram. Actually, I might not have access to Telegram. I'll let you guys know one way or another. I can't remember Saudi Block's Telegram. So inshallah, that's my plan. We'll try to Zoom it from the Haram, inshallah. And if not, then I'll let you guys know. All right. Jazakumullahu khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.